The silence on the floor is the first thing you notice. It is not a peaceful silence. It is the sound of 1,000 people holding their breath at once. Then, the screens change. Every monitor, every ticker, every terminal across the vast expanse of the trading floor shifts from steady white to a violent, pulsing red. The headlines are not just scrolling, they are screaming. They claim the old guard is finished. They claim the giants of cybersecurity are being dismantled in the dark, one line of code at a time. Traders stand frozen, staring at the cascading numbers. The air feels heavy, pressurized by the sudden collapse of confidence. You can see the panic in the way they grip their desks, the way they refuse to look at their neighbors. The market is not just reacting to a dip, it is reacting to an extinction event. Every flicker of the red light is a signal that the rules have changed overnight. The freeze lasted exactly 10 seconds. Then, the first finger hit the sell button. It was a sharp, mechanical click that echoed through the sudden void of the room. That single action acted as a catalyst. Around the floor, the hesitation evaporated, replaced by a frantic, synchronized movement. Hands flew across keyboards. Phones were snatched up, pressed hard against ears, voices rising in a jagged chorus of liquidation orders. They were not analyzing. They were purging. Every trade was a desperate attempt to cut losses before the supposed collapse of the legacy giants became total. The screen data showed a vertical drop, a cliff-edge descent that mirrored the panic in the room. Traders shoved past each other, eyes locked on the red-drenched monitors, ignoring everything but the exit. The floor was no longer a place of commerce. It was a lifeboat drill where nobody believed the boat would float. While the floor screamed in panic, I sat in a room that smelled of ozone and stale air, staring at a different kind of screen. I spent the last 30 days ignoring the headlines and digging into the raw, unvarnished truth. I pulled the deployment logs from every startup that claimed to be the new king of the hill. I traced their execution paths, line by line, through the dark corners of their code bases. The market was selling based on fear, but I was buying into the data. My fingers moved across the keys, not to trade, but to verify. I mapped the actual traffic, the latency, and the failure rates of these supposed disruptors. The reality hidden in these logs was far colder than the red numbers on the trading floor. I cross-referenced their claims against the reality of their infrastructure. I looked at the memory dumps and the kernel-level hooks. What I found was not a revolution that would burn the giants to the ground. It was something far more complex and far more profitable if you knew where to look. The narrative of total industry extinction is a convenient fiction for those who do not read the fine print. Look past the flashing red headlines and the frantic sell-off. The data does not show a graveyard of legacy giants. It shows a massive, calculated migration of capital. The money is not vanishing. It is simply moving from one line item to another. I mapped the budget flows of 3 major enterprise firms over the last 2 quarters. The shift is unmistakable. They are not cutting their security spending. They are reallocating it. The panic on the floor assumes that these new startups are predators hunting the giants to death. That is a fundamental misunderstanding of the market. What is actually happening is a quiet, deliberate restructuring of how security budgets are deployed. It is not an apocalypse for the old guard. It is a transformation of their operational priorities. The giants are not being replaced. They are being forced to evolve their spending to accommodate a new class of tools. This is not a revolution that kills. It is a revolution that consolidates. The market is reacting to the noise of disruption, but the reality is a slow, steady realignment of enterprise resources. Stop looking for the end of the world. Look for the movement of the money. That is where the real story is written. The market is drunk on the word agentic, throwing it at anything that can generate a summary. But I have seen the code, and the gap between the hype and the reality is a canyon. We need to strip away the marketing veneer. A chatbot is a glorified librarian. It watches a breach occur, pulls a log, and sends you a polite alert that your house is on fire. It reports the damage, but it does nothing to stop the flames. That is not a revolution. That is a notification tool. An agent, however, is a firefighter. It doesn't just watch the breach. It identifies the intrusion, isolates the compromised node, and executes the remediation command in real time. It acts, it resolves. Most of what you see labeled as Agentic today is just a chatbot with a fancy interface. It requires a human to click approve before it moves a finger. If your security system needs a human in the loop to make a decision during a high-speed attack, it is not an agent, it is a delay. The difference is not in the speed of the text generation. It is in the authority to execute. If you cannot tell the difference, you are betting on the wrong horse. If you are tired of losing money on the wrong startups, stop listening to the press releases and start running the audit. I have developed a 3-point checklist to filter out the noise and identify the companies that actually matter. This is not about sentiment or market buzz. It is about technical viability. When you look at a firm claiming to lead the agentic revolution, you apply these 3 filters without exception. Point 1. Does the company own the proprietary data layer? If they are just wrapping an API around a public model, they have no moat, no defense, and no future. Point 2. Can the system execute a remediation command without human intervention? If it requires a click to approve button, it is not an agent, it is a notification tool. Point 3. Look at the integration depth. A true agentic security platform must sit at the kernel level, not just the application layer. Most of these so-called disruptors fail at the very first gate. They are built on borrowed infrastructure, relying on public models that any competitor can access. We are going to dissect these points one by one, starting with the most critical, the data layer. If you ignore this, you ignore the entire value proposition. Let us dissect the first gate, the proprietary data layer. This is the bedrock of any legitimate security firm. If a startup claims to be an agentic disruptor but relies on a public model, they are not building a moat. They are building a house on rented land. I have reviewed the architecture of dozens of these firms. They take a public API, slap a user interface on top, and call it innovation. That is not innovation. That is a vulnerability. When the underlying model provider updates their terms, these companies lose their entire advantage. They have no internal feedback loop, no unique telemetry, and no ability to train on specific high-stakes threat patterns. A real agentic platform feeds on its own proprietary data. It learns from every attack it blocks, every false positive it rejects. This creates a compounding advantage that a public model cannot replicate. If they cannot show unique data, they are just a wrapper. Investors who fail to verify this are buying a subscription to a service that will be commoditized. If the data is not theirs, the business is not theirs. Now we move to the second gate. Execution power. This is where the marketing hype hits the wall of reality. Many startups claim to be agentic, but when you look under the hood, they are nothing more than glorified notification engines. They detect a threat, they send an alert, and they wait for a human to press a button. That click to approve button is not a safety feature. It is a confession of incompetence. In the time it takes for an analyst to see that notification, open their laptop, and click that button, the breach is already complete. The data is exfiltrated. The ransomware is deployed. A true agentic platform does not ask for permission to stop a house fire. It turns on the sprinklers. If a system requires human intervention to remediate a known threat, it is not an agent. It is a pager. You are paying for a tool that tells you how you are being robbed, not one that stops the robbery. To survive in this market, the system must possess the authority to execute commands at machine speed. It must identify the malicious packet, isolate the infected node, and patch the vulnerability in milliseconds. If the platform cannot act without a human hand on the wheel, it is fundamentally incapable. Do not mistake a notification tool for a security agent. One provides information, the other provides defense. Only one deserves your capital. The third and final gate is the most critical. Integration depth. This is where the pretenders are truly exposed. Most security startups operate at the application layer, sitting high above the operating system where they can only see what the software chooses to report. They are essentially watching the front door while the thief is already inside the walls. A true agentic security platform must sit at the kernel level. It needs to monitor the raw system calls, the memory allocation, and the hardware interrupts. If a platform cannot see the kernel, it is blind to the most dangerous exploits. I have audited systems that claim to be revolutionary, yet they rely on standard APIs that can be easily spoofed. They are not agents, they are observers. When you move to the kernel, You gain the ability to intercept malicious activity before it ever reaches the application layer. You stop the threat at the source. This level of access requires deep engineering, rigorous testing, and a level of trust that most startups simply have not earned. It is the difference between a guard and the foundation. If a platform is not integrated at the kernel, it is not a defense system. It is a luxury add-on. If they cannot touch the core, they cannot protect the company. Now that we have established the technical threshold for true agentic security, we must turn our attention to the market narrative. Look at the top 5 legacy cybersecurity firms. The headlines call them dinosaurs. The trading floor treats them like relics waiting to be buried by the next wave of agile startups. Investors are hitting the sell button in a frenzy, convinced that these massive, established entities are being dismantled overnight. I spent the last month digging into the actual codebases and deployment logs of these firms. I wanted to see if the extinction event was real or if it was merely a projection of market anxiety. What I found was not the slow decay of a dying giant, but a complex, calculated silence. The dinosaurs are not dying. They are simply changing their hunting strategy. The market is betting on a revolution that has already been bought and paid for. While the headlines scream about the death of the old guard, the reality is far more surgical. I tracked the capital flows and the intellectual property transfers of those 5 legacy firms. They are not being dismantled. They are the ones doing the dismantling. Each of them is quietly acquiring the very startups that were supposed to replace them. These are not hostile takeovers. They are strategic absorptions. They identify the most promising agentic engines, the ones that actually pass the 3-point checklist, and they bring them into the fold before the market even knows they exist. It is a masterclass in consolidation. By the time a startup makes enough noise to hit the headlines, the legacy giant has already signed the paperwork. They are not just buying the technology, they are buying the engineering talent and the proprietary data layers that fuel those systems. The disruptors are not killing the giants. They are becoming the new immune system for the giants. The panic on the trading floor is a distraction, a failure to see the board. The giants are not dying. They are simply consuming the competition to fortify their own massive enterprise footprints. The disruption narrative is a shell game, and the house is winning. The integration is not a gentle handshake. It is a forced assimilation. I have seen the internal deployment logs. These legacy giants take the raw, agentic engines from their acquisitions and strip away the flashy user interfaces. They rewire the core logic to sit directly at the kernel level of their massive enterprise platforms. It is a brutal, efficient process. They force these autonomous agents to inherit the security policies, the legacy compliance protocols, and the massive data lakes. The disruptors were designed to run in isolated, agile clouds. Now, they are being shackled to the backbone of the world's most complex networks. This is not just a feature update. It is a total conversion of the startup's DNA. By embedding these engines, they are weaponizing the tools meant to destroy them. The disruption theory relies on the idea that the giants are too slow to move. But look at the speed of these deployments. The disruptors are not replacing the giants. They are being consumed to make the giants faster, smarter, and more entrenched than ever before. Stop looking for the revolution in the headlines. The disruption narrative is a shell game designed to move capital, not to build the future. When you strip away the hype, the data reveals a singular, cold truth. This is not disruption. It is consolidation. The market is not witnessing the death of the old guard. It is witnessing the most aggressive period of infrastructure absorption in the history of cybersecurity. I have analyzed the contract values of these merged entities. They are not shrinking, they are doubling. The legacy giants are not being replaced by the startups they acquire. They are using those startups to build a moat so wide that no new player can ever hope to cross it. Every time a startup claims to dismantle a giant, it is actually just handing over the keys to its own engine. The result is a market where the giants own the data. The dust is settling, and the landscape is not new. It is simply more concentrated. The giants are not dying. They are evolving into the bedrock of autonomous defense. The noise you see on your screen is just that noise. The reality is a clear, calculated path toward total market dominance by those who were supposed to be extinct. The reason for this consolidation is not just corporate greed. It is a desperate necessity for survival. The threat landscape has fundamentally changed. We are no longer dealing with hackers sitting in dark rooms typing commands. We are facing autonomous, machine-speed malware that can scan, infiltrate, and exfiltrate data in milliseconds. A human analyst, no matter how skilled, is a bottleneck. By the time an alert hits a dashboard, the breach has already occurred. The latency gap between a threat appearing and a human clicking a button is where the damage is done. These modern attacks operate at a velocity that renders traditional, manual response protocols obsolete. Every second of human hesitation is a window of opportunity for the attacker. This is why autonomous defense is no longer a luxury or a marketing buzzword. It is a mandatory requirement for any organization that wants to keep its data intact. The speed of the attack has outpaced the speed of human cognition. If your security platform requires a human to verify the threat, you've already lost the war. The only way to counter a machine is with a faster, more precise machine. This is the reality driving the market. It is an arms race, where the only winning move is to remove the human from the loop entirely. Follow the money, and the picture becomes even clearer. We are seeing a radical shift in how enterprise security budgets are allocated. Forget the vanity metrics of user growth or social media buzz. Look at the contract values. Companies that have successfully integrated autonomous, agentic engines into their core infrastructure are seeing their contract values double, sometimes triple, in a single fiscal year. Why? Because they are no longer selling software. They are selling the prevention of catastrophe. In the old world, security was a line item for compliance. You paid for a tool, you checked a box, and you hoped for the best. Now, the value proposition is flipped. A platform that can autonomously detect and neutralize a breach before it touches the database is worth 10 times the cost of a legacy alert system. I have reviewed the renewal logs for the top 5 firms. The clients are not just staying, they are increasing their spend by massive margins. They are paying for the certainty of resolution. The startups that were supposed to kill the giants are now the engines driving this explosive growth. It is about the measurable, financial impact of autonomous defense. Now, look away from the screens. The panic you see on the trading floor is a reaction to headlines, not a reflection of reality. Those flashing red tickers and the frantic selling are driven by a fundamental misunderstanding of what is actually happening in the industry. It is easy to get caught up in the noise of the day, to let the fear of the old guard dying dictate your investment strategy. But if you look at the data, the story is entirely different. The market is not collapsing, it is correcting its path. The fear-mongering about legacy giants being dismantled overnight is a narrative designed for clicks, not for investors who care about long-term growth. I have spent the last month digging into the actual code bases and deployment logs of these supposed disruptors. The reality is not a revolution that kills the giants. It is a fundamental shift in how security budgets are spent. The noise on your screen is just that noise. Stop watching the ticker and start watching the underlying evolution of the infrastructure. The legacy giants are not dying. They are evolving into the very infrastructure that will host the next decade of autonomous defense. Think about the scale. A startup might have a brilliant engine, but it lacks the reach, the compliance certifications, and the deep-rooted trust of a global enterprise. The giants have all three. I have analyzed the top 5 firms currently being labeled as dinosaurs by the market. Each of them is quietly acquiring the very startups that were supposed to replace them. They are not just buying code. They are integrating these agentic engines into existing, massive enterprise footprints. This is not disruption in the sense of destruction. It is consolidation in the sense of fortification. By absorbing these agile tools, the giants are becoming more resilient, more capable, and more essential than ever before. They provide the stability that large-scale organizations demand. When a Fortune 500 company decides to automate its security, it does not bet its entire network on an unproven startup. It bets on the platform that has been there for 20 years, now upgraded with the latest autonomous intelligence. This is the new reality. The giants are the bedrock. We are witnessing a fundamental shift in the nature of digital defense. For decades, security was defined by the reactive alert. An analyst sat in a dark room, staring at a screen, waiting for a red light to blink. By the time they saw the breach, the damage was already done. That era is ending. We are moving toward a world of proactive autonomous resolution. Imagine a system that does not just report a threat, but identifies, isolates, and neutralizes it before a single human analyst even receives a notification. This is the promise of the agentic revolution. The threat landscape is moving faster than human fingers can type, and the only way to keep pace is to remove the lag of human intervention entirely. This is not just a technical upgrade. It is a total transformation. We are building a future where the network defends itself, where the infrastructure is alive with the intelligence to anticipate danger. The future of defense is not about watching the breach happen. It is about ensuring it never has the chance to begin. The dust is settling on the market, and the winners are already visible to those who look past the headlines. Success in this new era boils down to 3 non-negotiable traits. First, you must own the data layer. Without proprietary information, you are just a passenger on someone else's model. Second, you must control the execution. If your system requires a human to click a button, it is not an agent, it is a bottleneck. Third, and most importantly, you must maintain the trust of the enterprise. Trust is the currency that legacy giants have spent decades accumulating, and it is the barrier that no startup can bypass overnight. The noise on your screen is just that noise. Ignore the panic. Ignore the sell buttons. Focus on the companies that possess the data, command the execution, and hold the keys to the enterprise network. These are the entities that will be left standing when the cycle completes. Invest in the foundation, not the frenzy. The future belongs to the autonomous.